While the work of women across the world is something to be acknowledged every single day, we celebrate. We celebrate those who began the fight for equal rights for women. We celebrate women who continue to break barriers, who are change makers, and are leaders charting new paths. We celebrate those committed to equity, and many of them are right here leading Baltimore City.
Good evening. I'm Araceley, Stafford, Wage Enforcement Supervisor within the Office of Equity and Civil Rights. And right here on Charm TV, I'll be joined by some of Baltimore leaders who also identify as a woman. We will discuss the gender pay gap, the slow process that has been made over the last 20 years, and what Baltimore City is doing to advance pay equity for women, especially women of color. I'm now joined by Baltimore City Administrator, Ms. Faith Leach, the Chief Equity Officer, Ms. Dana Moore, and Acting City Solicitor, Ebony Thompson. Ladies, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
I want to open the conversation by asking each of you define equity and what equity looks like for women in your respective industries. Let's start with you, Chief Moore.
Sure. Well, again, thank you for having me and for that question. So equity in my industry, I'm now the city's Chief Equity Officer, so I feel like we've got to talk about what it looks like for the entire city enterprise. And it's really just making sure that, first with our employees, of which there are 13,000, it might be 14,000 by now, that everyone has what they need to succeed and everyone has an equal opportunity to take advantage of the opportunities that we offer in the city. And then when you talk about the city at large, it's making sure that the residents, the people that live, work, and play in Baltimore have an equitable access to all that the city has to offer.
Absolutely. I'll just add on to what Chief Moore said. Equity is about making sure that everyone gets a fair shot, that everyone gets access to fair and equitable opportunities. But it's also about not just equal access. It is about deeply investing in those communities that have been underinvested in for decades. And oftentimes those communities are communities of color and women in particular. And so we have to be very intentional if we are talking about having an equity focus on really deeply investing in those communities that have been overlooked and underserved.
And I couldn't agree more with Chief Moore and also Chief Administrator Leach, especially in my industry, and also the Chief Moore shares also in my industry. She's in 2 or more industries in the legal industry where women have always been underrepresented, and women of color and Black women less than 5%. So I definitely want to echo the intentionality that is required if there's any chance for equity, especially in a profession such as the legal industry.
Now I have some data to share with you guys. According to the United States Census, women earn approximately 84 cents to every dollar a white non-Hispanic man earns. That means that women must work nearly 15 months to earn what men makes in 12 months. To add insult to injury, this reality is even more bleak for Black and Latino women who earn about 65 cents and 60 cents respectively. As a woman in leadership here in Baltimore City, what are you doing in your current role to realize pay equity for all women? Ebony?
Well, as leader of the law department, the first thing that comes to mind is the law. And we have 3 different bodies that we're looking at within the law department. Of course, federal law, we have the Equal Pay Act of 1963. We have Title VII Civil Rights Act of 1964, which both are going to prohibit pay discrimination based on gender. And then we have the state laws and local laws here in Baltimore, employment laws that expand that, where it's not just gender, it could be gender identity and also other protected characteristics and classifications. So outside of the law, though, you want to ensure that within your practice group, you're also providing those opportunities and looking at knowing that the industry itself, where there's underrepresentation by women, by women of color, and making sure that when you look at when you have pay raises, that it's done equitably, that you notice when the lowest paid people are African American women or women of color or women in itself, and just go about making those changes. Now, I will say in the law department specifically, we are helping to write and draft laws, and then also shepherdizing through the legislative process that protects these rights. So we have an active role in that. And that's something that within the department that I want to emphasize and structure. So that's some of the things that I'm doing in my role.
Faith?
Yeah. So for me, it is about policy and practice. So in my role, I oversee the day-to-day operations of the city of Baltimore, and all of the city's departments report up to the chief administrative officer, including the Department of Human Resources, Public Works, Public Safety. And so for me, it is about ensuring that all of our agencies, as Ebony talked about the law, are actually implementing policy in a way that is fair and equitable, right? So it's one thing to pass a law or to develop a policy, but we have to ensure that it is enforced and it is implemented across all of our agencies in a way that is fair. And so that is one of the things that I am responsible for doing in my platform as the Chief Administrative Officer. But more than that, it is about looking at job classifications, right? It's about doing those pay audits to ensure that that in those job classifications where women are overrepresented, that they're still being paid fairly, or that we are creating an environment where there are career pathways, where women can start at one level, but we're creating opportunities for them to compete with everyone else for opportunities for growth. And so again, it's that duality of of implementing and having good policy, but then also putting it into practice. A thing that I want to make sure that we lift up in this conversation, that it's important for all of us to do, and Chief Moore is excellent at doing this, but we have to lean into mentoring and supporting women. Right? Mentoring and supporting women that are pursuing leadership opportunities throughout the government. And we see women do that every single day at all levels of government, not just the most senior levels of government, but we have to be very intentional, again, about lifting up and really pouring into other women who are really just trying to ascend that career ladder.
Director?
Yeah, I agree with both of my sisters here on this panel. And it's not hard to do. The intentionality that comes to the equal pay and making sure that women are having the opportunities, it's not a hard thing to do. You just have to have the commitment to do it. You know, the law mandates it, policy requires it, but then our job is to make sure it happens. So, you know, as you know, when I bring someone into the Office of Equity and Civil Rights, the first thing I do is look at what is it that they're asking and how does this fit in to the schemata that we have in the Office of Equity and Civil Rights, and always making sure that there's pay equity. And I talk about it a lot in the office, often in our meetings, making sure that we're always aware of who's coming in, who's already in the office, how long have they been there, doing the salary reviews and making sure that there's harmony in all that we do. So, and I think that happens across, you know, all of the agencies, and it's, you know, we're going to get there.
Generally, women are underrepresented in highly lucrative careers, but overrepresented in positions that are critical to our communities and economic, like teaching and nursing, but underpaid. Faith, you've done a lot of work with young people in Baltimore in your previous roles as deputy mayor. What steps do you think we can take to expose girls and young women to highly skilled and high-earning positions in historically male-dominated fields, with also ensuring that our most critical roles like teachers and nurses are paid for the impact they make?
Yeah, no, that's a really important question. And I think we have to unpack this notion of occupational segregation. And so what occupational segregation means is there oftentimes are particular industries or particular careers or jobs where there's either an overrepresentation of one group or an underrepresentation of another group. And so we see that in some of the careers that you mentioned, nursing, teaching, but we also see that in some of our lower wage jobs and service jobs. And so the reason why that's really important is during the pandemic, we saw how Black and Latina women in particular were disproportionately impacted by the pandemic because they were on the front lines. They were nurses' aides, right? They were working in supermarkets. Like, they kept the economy moving when while we all were at home. But then we have to unpack that a little bit more. We have to think about, you know, the women who were on the front lines during the pandemic, who were largely Black and Latina, who also were mothers, right? Yes. But their children had to be at home, and their children had to learn from home, right? And so the impact, right, that had even on them being able to support their children and learning from home. And so those are the things that we have to unpack when we talk about this notion of occupational segregation. And usually it is women and women of color being grouped in fields where they are paid much less than men. And so to the other point of how we address that and how we actually fix this idea of occupational segregation, one, we have to acknowledge that it exists. And then two, we have to be intentional about creating these career pathways that I've talked about. And that is pathways from, you know, being a frontline worker to being a manager to being a supervisor to being an owner, if you will. And that is through all industries. And then we have to expose young women and young girls to all of the opportunities that are available to them, to opportunities to pursue entrepreneurship. Public safety is another area where here in the city of Baltimore, we're being very intentional about recruiting women into careers in public safety. There's also data that tells us the in-demand career fields, right, where the jobs are going to be over the next 10 and 20 years. And those are the areas that we need to be training our young women right now that are in high school and college for the careers in IT and careers in technology, and also some of those fields like the construction trades. And I do want to use this opportunity to plug one really cool thing that we're doing here in Baltimore. So when I first became deputy mayor, we actually were awarded a $5 million grant from JP Chase for the Advancing Cities Challenge. And what we did with that grant was about creating wealth building pathways for Black and Latina women. And so we built this collective of leaders across Baltimore, across industries, and we came up with this proposal to deeply invest in Black and Latina women who are small women developers who are revitalizing communities in West Baltimore. So the Parity Homes with Bree Jones and Black Women Build and all of the amazing women that are doing so much for their communities. And so we use this money to support those developers, but then we also are creating a pipeline to train other women to be developers so they can be the next Shelley Halstead or Bree Jones. And we're training women in the construction and skills trades. But that's an example of what we have to do if we want to really break through this occupational segregation and really create a pathway for women to pursue careers in in-demand fields.
A 2022 survey conducted by the American Bar Association showed the numbers of women lawyers is steadily rising and concluded that approximately 38% of lawyers are women. Chief Moore and Solicitor Thompson, both being lawyers, how do you think we can expose young women to high-earning roles in male-dominated industries?
It's all about the pipeline. It's creating that pipeline. It's the exposure that City Administrator Leach has talked about. Exposing young girls. I know last Friday, the mayor, I forget the name of it, I think it was Empower Her, but held a summit of young girls, and my granddaughter was one of the young girls attending. And she thought it was phenomenal, just creating these opportunities for exposure, to learn, to understand. I think my granddaughter knows that her grandmother is a lawyer, and she knows what that means, but not every young girl out there has that opportunity. So we have to create that. But I just want to say that girls should be able to follow their passion, whatever that might be. And it shouldn't be the case that your passion consigns you to a life of underpayment. That should not be the case. There are many, many people that want to be a teacher, or they want to be, a frontline worker, and that should not mean that they're always going to be underpaid. We have to develop a system where we really pay people their value, their real value. So many the first responders during the pandemic were people that were incredibly underpaid, and we really need to think about how we're going to address that. So in terms of lawyers, when I was in law school, I was one of just a very, very few women, and maybe 2 black women in the whole class. And it's different now. Things are much more open. There's many, many more opportunities. And my mother gave me a dictionary, Black's Law Dictionary, when I graduated from college, and she wrote a note. My mother did not have her college degree when I graduated from law school, and she wrote a note saying, "I have no idea what it is that you're about to do. Just know that your best has always been good enough for me." And I still have that note. My own daughter framed it for me one Christmas. And, it really is just a statement of, in my mother's generation, becoming a lawyer just was not an opportunity. It was not there for black women. Born and raised in Topeka, Kansas, pre-Brown, as she says. My generation, it's wide open, and and for Ebony and Faith and our daughters, it's just whatever they want. It's wide open.
I couldn't agree more with Chief Moore specifically. It's weird we are right here together, because she actually is a part of this intentionality. She paved the way. She is the first acting city solicitor, right? And she's a firm believer that it's not good enough if you don't bring people along with you.
Someone behind.
Right?
There's got to be a second and a third.
One of my biggest champions when I got to the city, in Chief Moore, and it's about that intentionality and us paving the way and making the way, because law is, while you did quote that quote, that it rose from 33% in 2012 to 38% in 2022. However, we look at that same 10-year period for black attorneys, it actually went from 4.7% in 2012 to 4.3% in 2022. So it went down. So while women as a whole may be experiencing the rise, again, we come back to black women, women of color, are not, right? And then we look at what is comprising of the legal population right now. Non-Hispanic whites are now 80.1%. In 2012, they were 88%. So it does show that there is some diversity coming in, but they're still overrepresented because they are 60% of the population, right? Whereas the 4.3% now, we're 13% of the population, so we're still underrepresented. So there is a lot of intentionality, and to make up for that, what we're doing in terms of the law department is going out and seeking, when you go to law schools, seeking the women's law clubs, right? That's who you recruit from. You go to them. If they're not coming to you, you go to them. You're going to the Black Law Student Associations, and you are looking, and you are creating those internships. And a little known fact, I try to tout it a lot, but I think Chief Moore knows about it, the My Law program, which was originally called the Law Links program, where I was a junior in high school, and my first internship was at the solicitor's office. My first introduction to law, and I'm coming back to lead the law department, okay? From 16 years old. And it starts there. It starts in high school. It is about the pipeline. It has to be intentional. If you are going to go past less than 5%, you have to do some outreach. You have to be intentional. So I'm very passionate about the legal industry, as everyone knows, and those are things that you need to do. You have to be intentional, and you have to go out and make that change that you want to see.
So the Law Links program was started. I was one of the
know.
people that helped start
Yes. That's a little connected. Sorry.
So it's really amazing. 'Cause I had no idea when we started it was with the Maryland State Bar that one day a law link would be the head of the law department. It's really amazing.
And it was the
right?
second year when I was in. It was the second year that it was started. It started in 1995.
Right.
And it's crazy. Last year was my first year here, and I had the first class of my own law links where I got to mentor them. And it's just phenomenal that that program is still going on, and it's reaching out to some of our inner city schools and pulling them in and introducing them to law. And those are the types of programs that we desperately need if we want to change the numbers and the statistics and really expose young women to this. I love this field.
Amazing.
So,
Amazing career.
Yes. So
it works.
yeah.
According to the U.S. Government Accountability Office, women are underrepresented in management positions. However, here in Baltimore City government, 78% of Mayor Scott's executive team are women. Yet, that does not always translate into equity and inclusion. How do each of you use your platform to influence the climate and culture? Ebony?
Oh, so the first thing that I do is I make sure that within the law department that we are very intentional about having equity coordinators that report to our chief equity officer, making sure that we are doing everything that we can to make sure that equity is all throughout the department. The next thing that we do is that we propose ideas to the administration. We are not just reactive where we're just putting out fires. I like the law department to actually be proactive and to bring things. One of the things that we initiated was parental leave for our city employees, and we're working right now with finance on that. And the best way is that should be equally applied to women and men. So if we want to start this, we have to start it from the beginning by making it equitable from the beginning, knowing that it's not just women that take care of children, it's also men that are fathers that want to take care of children and make sure they're given that equal access. So absolutely, I want it to be within the department and then also within the city by bringing creative ideas to the city that hopefully get implemented.
Director Moore, can you explain to us what's the role of the equity coordinators?
Sure. So the equity coordinators are sort of the frontline people within each agency. Very proud to share that every city agency has an equity coordinator. Everyone. That was really, really important, and that's in compliance with the city's equity ordinance. So the equity coordinators are intended to be direct reports to the director, the head of the agency, head of the department, and they meet with myself and Karan Watkins once or twice a month. We do a mandatory meeting and an optional office hours. They're there to share information about what we're doing as equity, the equity officers. They handle problems that do arise with anyone feeling that they're not being treated fairly. They are highly trained, and we hope that they will take their training and deliver that within their agency. And for example, we're going to have an all-day retreat on March 30, where we will be delivering fresh content and ideas, and not just about law, but how they can actually bring equity into their agency. They're also really the main people that work on the equity assessment within each agency.
Inclusion happens when people can utilize their talents and feel value for their contributions fully. Equitable policies are the foundation for ensuring that everyone has the opportunity to advance and thrive. How do you all actually measure compensation differences to determine whether or not there is a bias? Ms. Leach?
The top 3 women in Mayor Scott's administration are all women, and they are all Black women, right? So I think that there is no question that Mayor Scott supports women and supports women in leadership. And while it is impactful to have a Black woman be the chief administrative officer and the second in command to the mayor. I think what is more impactful is that we build opportunities and we build these ladders of opportunities for other women to come up behind us. And so it's not enough that I'm the first Black woman to be the chief administrative officer. It is about, as Chief Moore and the city solicitor talked about, it is about bringing those women up after we are out of these roles. And so that is what I am using my platform to do, is to create those ladders of opportunities for other women. It is not enough to be the first. We have to create a second and a third, as Chief Moore said. Now, to the more practical things that are happening across the agencies, where we're creating this pipeline of women in management and we are shifting the culture. I think one, we've used this term about being intentional and intentionality. And the reason why I think it keeps coming up is because we do have to be purposeful. If you want to shift culture, you have to purposely commit to shifting the culture each and every day. That is how you shift culture. And if we want to create this culture of promoting women in leadership, of paying women fairly, then it starts at our agencies. It starts on the front lines. It starts in the interview process, ensuring that there are women that are included on interview panels as you are hiring people for different roles and promotional opportunities. It is about identifying promotional opportunities and tapping a woman on the shoulder to ensure that she sees that that opportunity is available for her. One of the things that we often do as women, and really a lot of people do this, and I'll talk about my own experience. Oftentimes we think about roles and opportunities as too big for us. We think about, maybe we're not ready. Maybe there's another step that needs to come before we take that big leap. But what I often tell young women is take the leap. Take the leap. There are people that don't look like you with less qualifications that are leaping all over the place, right? And so we have to really just pour into women throughout this government, throughout schools across this city, and we have to put them in a position where they can take the leap, right? Especially if they've worked hard, especially if they're qualified. We got to ensure that they are given the opportunities, but also that other women are there to support them when they take that leap. And I'll close with acknowledging a couple of women who did that for me just in my short time in Baltimore. So I was recently confirmed as the chief administrative officer about, 2 weeks ago. And one of the first emails and letters that I got was a congratulatory message from Comptroller Learman, who is the first woman comptroller of the state of Maryland. And I can't underscore how much it meant to me to know that she was looking. Right? To know that she was cheering me on after she just broke her own glass ceiling. She was reaching back to tell me, I see you and I support you, right? And it wasn't just Comptroller Learman, Senator Carter, and so many women in the state of Maryland that really reached out to say, I see you, I support you, and I am cheering for you. And that is as equally as important as creating the opportunity. It's being there to support women when they get in position and when they get in roles.
And I just have one footnote. It's 78% women in the Scott administration, but there was a time, everybody, when it was 100% men. There were no women in leadership positions in city government, state government. So, we got some room to grow. But yes, we're very proud of you. Very proud of you, Faith.
Director?
Sure. So that's kind of a hard question because it really requires you to look on a case-by-case basis. And when you're bringing someone in, I'll tell you what I do. I really look at all of their skill sets, their background, their experience, not just the job description, but what is it they're going to actually be doing, and how does that compare to someone that's already there. But I also look at what's happening in other agencies. If there's similar jobs, let's just talk about investigators. There's similar jobs in other agencies. I will call and say, well, tell me what you're doing and how are they being paid? We pull reports and to make sure that the salary that's being offered is competitive across the agencies in the city. But then there's an obligation to stay in touch and to continue not to hesitate to promote. not hesitate to give a pay increase. Of course, we got to make sure that we got the money, we can fund it, but it's an ongoing, continual intentionality throughout a person's career with the city. You know, it really starts when someone makes an application. We say that we're a city that pays fair. So we gotta keep that commitment, and you do that by being very, intentional is a buzzword, but because nothing happens without it.
Yeah, so I think I've mentioned pay audits before, but that is really important, is that from time to time that we use the data that is in front of us and that is available to us to really look at the trends, right? Are we seeing, a overrepresentation of women in particular job classifications? How are women across job classifications paid in comparison to men, right? So all of the data on government salaries, that's public information. And so we should be using that data internally to do that check regularly to ensure that we are adequately paying women a fair wage.
Ms. Thompson?
Yes, and for the law department, we look at the years barred outside of the gender, and we noticed that sometimes the pay was lower when we did look at the gender. And so when we do have those funds available, we make sure that we reach that equity by making, if you barred the same amount of time, been at the department the same amount of time, you're basically doing the same job, even though you're in a different practice group, there should be no reason for these dramatic pay disparities that we've been noticing, and we look to correct them as soon as we get money in the funds to do it.
Okay. What does it mean to reduce the pay gap in Baltimore City? And what can you do in your official capacity to support it? Ms. Faith?
Yes. So I think right now Baltimore is we're faring okay, right? So we are right, I want to say at least in the top 20 when it comes to cities that have the least amount of a pay gap, but there's still a gap, and a little gap is too much of a gap. And so again, we have to be thoughtful and pragmatic in our approach to ensuring that we are closing that gap. And it is about, again, putting those policies in place, ensuring that our agencies are implementing the policies, ensuring that our agencies and HR professionals across the government are trained. And then it's also this empowerment factor, which we should talk about the tools that women have access to in order to really advocate for themselves. So I mentioned how internally we can do these pay equity audits. Well, we can also encourage employees and women to do that audit themselves, right? So again, I talked about how government data is publicly available. Women can use that research to look from agency to agency, from job classification to job classification, to ensure that they are being paid adequately. And so there are tools that women across this government have available to them, but we shouldn't wait for women to raise their hand. We have to do the hard work of ensuring that we are paying women fairly and that we are checking ourselves to ensure that we are always paying women fairly.
Director?
Yeah. So one of the things that's going to help that is we really have to make sure that we're eliminating some of the false barriers to the higher paying jobs. So what do I mean by that? We already demonstrated a willingness to eliminate drug testing for some jobs where it's just not relevant. Some of the jobs, if you look at our jobs across the city enterprise, a driver's license is required. Let's look at that. Do we really need to have that as a requirement for a job, or is that a barrier? Education. We for a lot of the jobs that get posted, we require a college degree or higher. And we really have to be willing to look at jobs and make sure, is that really a requirement for the actual work that is being done? Now, we don't talk about it a lot, but we should talk about what we're doing to make sure that women are entering the workforce. One of the greatest barriers to women entering the workforce is the lack of childcare. Good, affordable childcare. So is there something that we can do as a city to make sure that that barrier is addressed? And then, of course, sometimes your best advocate is you. And so we have to let women know you do have the power to speak up for yourself, and that no one can challenge you for doing that. We appreciate it. It's a high value.
Outside of advocating for laws and helping to draft laws that protect these issues, I think it's important to mention the residual effects when you get this wrong, right? When you are not inclusive, when you have people that there's a disparity in pay where they have to work longer to get the same amount of money, it takes volunteer opportunities away, right? The people that have to work longer, they don't have time to volunteer. They don't have time to really network with the community, the work community that they have. And that means that all employers lose. You lose. You lose that valuable interaction that comes with people feeling like their ideas are heard, that they can voice those ideas, that they have time to voice those ideas, and that you're really maximizing the use of your employees, and they are maximizing their time while they're working and getting things out of it. So it's a lot of things that you lose by getting this wrong. So as the law department, we really try to make sure that we get it right. Those are, I just want that to highlight that on the importance of actually getting it right.
And what are some of the challenges that you guys currently seeing and experiencing while trying to implement these practices on equity? What challenges?
Just this is how it's always been, right? And any change is usually met with resistance and when you're trying to change things up. So it's just that status quo and going against the status quo and changing things up. So you may face opposition there, but I want to highlight the importance of the Scott administration embracing this and knowing the importance of this and knowing that it's all throughout the administration. So knowing that when you come up against those barriers, you have a whole bunch of people to support you to break through those barriers. So I think that's very important.
Director?
Very well said. I mean, I don't think I can add much to that. It is the feeling, well, we've always done it this way, and so we're comfortable with it. I'll just lift up procurement, which is a real challenge. People have said that Baltimore is a poor city. We are not a poor city. We spend a lot of money, and procurement practices have the opportunity to, if we change them, to build generational wealth in Black and brown communities. And we're going to do that by not doing what we've always done, by doing it different, and getting people to understand that it is okay to take a large contract and break it down into small bits so that a lot of people get opportunity, and including women. That to me is one of the more exciting things that we're doing. It's a big challenge because there's resistance to change, but Mayor Scott has and the city administrator have made it very clear, as has the law department, this is what we're doing. Come on. So,
Ms. Leach?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges that folks often raise is a lack of resources, right? So, we can't raise the wages because, we don't have the budget. We don't have the resources available, right? But then when I go and I look across the enterprise and we have a 20% vacancy rate. So we can be intentional about where we invest our dollars at if we wanted to, and if there was a push from the top about how we invest our dollars on the personnel side. And so that's the kind of look that we are taking when it comes to our agencies. No is not a good enough answer. I don't have the resources is not a good enough answer. We are about pushing our agencies to get to yes and to do the right thing by any means necessary, because paying women equitably is the absolute right thing, and I don't have the budget or I don't have the resources is not an answer that I tolerate or the mayor.
Equity has been at the center of Mayor Scott's administration. How do you all believe his emphasis on equity has strengthened city government? Director?
There's some things that I hope the city administrator and the city attorney will talk about. So I'm going to just wait and let you guys do that. But how has it strengthened city government? One of the things that I think is really important is the guaranteed income. Really looking at young families with challenges and thinking outside the box of how we use our ARPA funding to really lift up families, lift up individuals. Just looking at people differently, looking at individuals, individual need, understanding that we have to do development different, that we can't just develop around the Inner Harbor, which is absolutely beautiful. It's the gem of the city. But there are communities across the city that are under invested in historically, and going there and making sure that there's investment and that those communities thrive. And that happens because of equity. The equity mandate, the equity focus. Equity is not just a buzzword, it's just not a convenient tag. It is actually what we are doing every single day for all of the decisions that we make. And I talked about this a little bit before we came out here. We have changed the culture of the city. It is an absolute delight to attend a meeting and talk about a real big challenge, and whoever's in the meeting will on their own say, but we've got to look at the equity aspect of this. It is what we do, it is who we are, it is our highest value, it's how we make our decisions. It's something that we never ever forget and we never let go. It's really intentionally making decisions that will make people's lives better.
Ms. Thompson?
Yes, I'd like to really raise up an issue that I've had the pleasure of working with our city administrator on back when she was deputy mayor with this squeegee initiative. And I can't think of a better way where we were intentional about equity in that whole process, in making sure that we got the resources that were needed for the squeegee workers. And then as the law department, as I developed the legal framework around that, equity was at the center of all of it, despite the multiple calls for us to do it another way, despite calls for us to clear the corners, despite calls for us to enforce laws on the books. We knew that doing it the equitable way was the right way to do it. And it allowed us to enforce in ways that most people hadn't even thought of, right? And it's about where we enforce, how we enforce, who we enforce it. Is it just one population? Is it just one area? No, everything was equity focused, and the whole collaborative spirit around that and bringing equity to that, I think it's representative of what the Scott administration is pushing for, how we want to tackle difficult issues, how we go about it. And we are all seeing the positive results of that. Although it's still a work in progress, we see the huge strides that we've made by putting equity first. So that's one thing that really stands out to me.
Yeah, so I want to just lift up one of the things that Chief Moore mentioned, and this piece about shifting the culture. We have to give credit where it is due. Mayor Scott shifted the culture of this government. Mayor Scott brought this very thoughtful and pragmatic approach about equity to government. There is not a day that goes by where I am not in at least 1 to 5 meetings where someone mentions equity, right? There is barely a BOE that goes by that Chief Moore isn't there and she is lifting up equity, right? But it is because it came from the top, because we have an equity mayor, right? This mayor said equity is going to be at the forefront of my agenda, and he demonstrated that you can govern well and still govern equitably, right? And that is what this administration is about, and that is what this mayor is about. And I don't think that this is just something that will last with this administration. When you shift cultures, you shift the culture for years to come, right? For generations to come. The work that we are doing now, from guaranteed income to the deep investment in boys and young men of color, to investing in young people that have parents that are incarcerated, from our very thoughtful and intentional pragmatic approach to violence prevention through the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement. Those are all efforts that have an immediate impact. But the real impact is the impact that we will see in the years to come and the generations to come, right? And that is why investing in and focusing on equity is so important and is at the heart of the Scott administration.
Now, just add, when we talk about equity and the impact on government, it's not equity or quality. It's equity and quality. It's equity and service. It's equity and fulfilling need. And that's just really important that we put that out there and understand that it's not a choice. It's a necessity, but we're not having to choose quality over equity.
Well said.
Thanks. City Solicitor.
First.
Second.
We are at the end of our conversation. I want to thank you for your time, for your powerful answers, and for your commitment to our beautiful city. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
very
you for having
much.
us.
You guys are
Thank you
wonderful.
for sharing.
Wonderful.